diagrams of brain is because, I mean, the brain is literally the command center of our lives. The brain rules everything. The brain is in charge of everything that controls the rest of our bodily systems. But the health of our brain is important, the actual structure of the brain is important. And for people who are in science like me, you understand that structure definitely matters, as well as affinity that goes along with charges, and also the chemical components matters as well, and how those functions as well. And this is the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is basically like probably the back here of my, well, you wouldn't be able to see it obviously, but this is the back here of my head. So this is basically responsible for a lot of the coordination of motor movements. So up in this cerebral cortex here, and this would be the parietal region, it's divided into like, I think it's 4 or 5 major lobe regions. So you have the frontal lobe, which is basically here. Then you have the temporal lobe, which is here. Occipital lobe is here. Parietal is here. And then you have the spinal cord, which extends from the brainstem, which it includes many things. But from this schematic point of view, you would just see the pons and the medulla in this diagram. So the skull, of course, you know, is hard. It's made of calcium, phosphorus, and some other important minerals that basically complex elements, like concussions, for example, when the brain jolts. And the back of the head is even dangerous, but all parts of the brain getting damaged. You don't want any damaged brain because neurogenesis isn't common in adults. Even with kids, it's not as common as you think it is when it comes to either widespread diseases or like, you know, harsh damages like a very, very extremely hard fall or a dare extreme accident. So yeah, so the pineal, in spiritual terms, you may hear of pineal gland, but the pineal gland, based on scientific research, has to do with melatonin production, the sleep-wake cycle, circadian rhythm, that kind of thing. It also has some other function that ties in with all the other structures of this region. And you have the hippocampus. The hippocampus region, which resides in the temporal lobe in this spine in the middle of the brain, is responsible mainly for learning and memory. But as you know, the brain doesn't work in like suppose you had an office, right? You had one person do this, one person do that, one person do that. That essentially isn't a unit, right? That's just probably, for example, if you look in office space, is different companies running a space. That's totally different from one company where you have the marketing department, you have the finance department, but all of them work together. So think of it as in that way. But in this sense, it's all about neurons connections, which have these long axons and these long dendrites that connect with one another, and they span for feet on feet on feet on feet. But it's all connected. So a specific region which would be responsible for things like that learning and memory, but you can see those same similar connections throughout all of the brain, because it's all just network. It's just certain regions are responsible for certain things based on research on the brain. Everything is processed in the rest of these regions. It has to report through the thalamus first. Thalamus is like basically the receptionist office. Like you have to go to the receptionist to get to anybody else in the building. So that's kind of what it is. And you have the pituitary. Is basically like the master gland for the hormone. It's like the hormone command center. And hormones are basically proteins in their nature, but of course their function could be buffering. It could be regulating things. It could be activating things. It could be deactivating things. Like for example, you have the hormone insulin. You have the hormone cortisol. Pretty sure you've heard them. One has to deal with your blood sugar levels. The other one has to do with inducing stress, which is of course valuable. And you have the corpus callosum, which is basically a bundle of neural fibers, and that's basically meaning that it just basically comprised of a large combination of axons. And axons, of course, are the middle of the cells. You can look up the structure of a neuron cell. I don't have it up here for you guys. So it's basically runs through the middle of the brain, so it connects the two hemispheres of the brain. So when you hear of, I don't know, seizures or epilepsy, which is a series of seizures, they usually, it can be different types of seizures, but commonly you will see it's overfiring across the two hemispheres. And they say even with women's brains have more connectivity with all the hemispheres, more so than men. And that's based on scientific research as well. All of this you can, of course, research. But why I said white matter is usually the axons of neurons, and axons can be very long. And then the gray matter that you hear about is basically the neuronal cell body or the terminals. So for like, all this is the frontal lobe actually. So learning and memory and executive functions and thinking and control and inhibitions and emotional regulation, all of those type of high cognitive functions would be associated in the frontal lobe.